Broadcasting live from Lothal. Good morning, Lothal. It's the Unofficial Star Wars Rebels podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another edition of Good Morning Lothal, the Unofficial Star Wars Rebels podcast. I'm Pete Salas, along with
Rolando Zamora.
How we doing, Rolly?
Oh, you know how I'm doing, Pete. Astros took it down, world champs again. I don't give a crap about all the crybabies out there because I know there's a lot of them.
There's a lot of Astros haters out there, man. But
yeah. But I'm doing great, man, and saw the episode today that we're gonna review, and just an awesome episode. I'm really excited to talk about it. How are you doing?
I'm doing good too, man. I'm doing good too. I watched the game. I watched them take it all the way, and I was very happy for you. I'm not a super baseball fan, but hey, it's the World Series and it's semi hometown team, so you got to root for that.
Hey, I appreciate the support.
Yes, sir. So we are here today to talk about season 2, episode 12. It's called A Princess on Lothal. But before we get to any of that fun stuff, Rolly, what's happening around the galaxy?
Let's see what's happening this week in Star Wars.
Okay, so as of today, November 7th, today we're recording, we got some big news in the Star Wars universe for some upcoming projects. The big news today is that The Acolyte has begun production, and today they revealed the cast. And some big names I was surprised to see in the cast. I'll go ahead and name them all off. Amanda Stenberg, who's the lead, we've talked about her before. Lee Jung-jae, Manny Jacinto, Daphne Keane, who you guys know as X-23 from Logan.
Oh, yes.
Jodie Turner-Smith, Rebecca Henderson, Charlie Barnett, Dean Charles Chapman, and the biggest name on this list by far, Carrie-Anne Moss.
Wow, yeah, that's a big cast, and of course some sci-fi royalty there with Carrie-Anne Moss at the end. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, for all you big Matrix fans out there. And I just wanted to give this little quote that StarWars.com put out because they were actually the ones that officially announced this information regarding the Acolyte. They described the Acolyte as a mystery thriller that will take viewers into a galaxy of shadowy secrets and emerging dark side powers in the final days of the High Republic era. A former Padawan reunites with her Jedi Master to investigate a series of crimes, but the forces they confront are more sinister than they ever anticipated.
Yeah, that sounds intriguing as all hell, but I gotta say, man, that anything that's going to follow Andor is going to have some really big shoes to fill as far as Star Wars TV series. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, seriously, the writing on Andor is just insane. And like I mentioned before, I hope that Lucasfilm is taking note of what's being shown in Andor, and they use it as a blueprint for what to do with writing. You know, right. I think Star Wars has a great handle on directing and design and, maintaining the Star Wars universe, but writing, I feel, is the next big step for Lucasfilm, and I feel Andor is really giving that blueprint. So I am excited to step into this world of the Acolyte. The High Republic's not something we've seen before on screen, so it's gonna be very fresh, very original. So let's see what they bring to the table. I'm really excited to see that show.
Right, but most definitely this one is going to be a more quote-unquote traditional Star Wars, with
Correct.
Jedis and, the Force and Padawans and all that stuff. So,
Correct. And I did want... in other news in Star Wars, I didn't write this on our outline, but I did want to briefly mention it. There are hard rumors, so to say, about an upcoming film that takes place after the sequel trilogy. I forget the director's name, but he's the writer rather. He's the gentleman that wrote Lost and the latest Watchmen series on HBO.
Damon Lindelof or something like that?
Yes, okay. That's him. Yeah. It's a very strong rumor that he is already working on the next project that is post-sequel trilogy. So we have heard confirmation, so to say, from Daisy Ridley and Poe Dameron and Oscar Isaac that they're very much interested in coming back to the Star Wars universe. John Boyega, not so much as I love Finn. Mm-hmm. I think he's still kind of on the fence about it. But I'm excited because this does seem like it's very realistic, something that's happening in very early stages. So Lucasfilm or Disney's not saying anything, but I believe that Disney is in plans to do something post-sequel. I know I'm a fan of Rey, regardless of what the fans out there say. So I'm gonna be very excited to see both her and Poe, back on the film screen, so to say.
Yeah, most definitely.
All right, let's talk about some birthdays that we have this week in Star Wars. First and foremost, we have Naomi Aki, November 2nd. She plays Janna in Rise of Skywalker. And just to kind of give you guys a brief character summary, if you guys may have forgotten her, Rise of Skywalker is somewhat of a controversial film. But she's actually the actress that's the former stormtrooper that kind of connects with Finn and more so Blando at the very end of the movie. Yeah, so I was always curious to see if they were going to have like a spin-off of her and Lando.
Right.
They kind of had that chemistry and line at the end where he asked her who she is and where she's from, and she doesn't know anything, and Lando's like, well, let's go find out.
Right.
So that's a character that I think would be very interesting for them to do some type of, spin-off just to get some more sequel action going in the Star Wars universe. Next on our list, we have Whit Hertford, November 2nd as well. He plays Corky Kryze in the Clone Wars. And Pete, have you heard the online rumors that Corky Kryze is actually the illegitimate child of Satine and Obi-Wan Kenobi?
No, I had not heard that.
Okay, yeah. So Corky Kryze, for you guys that have seen Clone Wars and may have forgotten, he's actually the quote-unquote nephew of the Duchess Satine. Okay. But then we also find out later that he's also the nephew of Bo-Katan. So there was no other siblings that were ever introduced that would say that Corky was the son of that sibling. So that's part of the rumors that the online fans have done, saying, well, like, if you look at his face, he's got the chin of Obi-Wan Kenobi, and we've always known that there's been something between Satine and Kenobi. So if you guys have any comments on that one out there, please drop a comment and let us know.
I'm gonna have to look that up again because I don't even remember the character like the way you're describing him. I remember the name. I remember, yes, that they had a nephew, but like I do not remember him right now.
Yeah, that's one of those, like, I ran into it on the internet types of things, and then I just dug a bit further into it. But Corky, I can't honestly say myself either that I remember him after one viewing of the Clone Wars. I had to get pulled back into it to remember, oh yeah, that was Corky.
Right.
Here's a fun one, and one of our personal favorites, Jim Cummings, November 3rd. You guys know him as Hondo Ohnaka in Clone Wars and Rebels. Next on our list, we have Thandie Newton, November 6th. You guys will remember her as Val from Solo, A Star Wars Story.
She was Woody Harrelson's like partner.
Yes, / love interest, girlfriend. Right. I don't know what's going on there, but she was badass.
Right.
And last on our list, we have Simone Kessel, November 7th. She plays Brea Organa in Obi-Wan Kenobi. That is Senator Bail Organa's wife in the show.
Gotcha. Okay, so if that brings us to the end of our birthdays, Rolly, let's get into Andor. This was episode 9, and it was called Nobody's Listening. Hell of an episode.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you for your thoughts, Pete, since apparently you barely watched Andor.
I just finished it about an hour ago. Yes, that is true.
So you have the more fresher opinion on it, but I've been thinking about this episode all week. I just want to hear yours before I give my input.
Well, we were giving high praise to Andy Serkis last week for his, coming out in the last one, and I'm glad it wasn't a one-off because he was back in this episode again, and very, very prominent role. In the last episode he was in, it was kind of positioned to where he was like going to be not so sympathetic to the cause of whatever Cassian, right. not friendly, definitely not friendly towards him. Not that he was in this one either, but at the very least in this one, there was a lot more life breathed into this character as far as what his main goal is. And his main goal in that prison is A, to keep his guys on task, but B, it's really just to get out of there, is to survive and make it through all of his shifts. But there was some things that happened in this episode that really just kind of like that character went full circle, I guess, basically is the best way to say it. So this was, to me, a really great episode that featured a lot more character development, if that's even possible. I mean, 9 episodes in, but we're still getting these different sides of these characters that I wasn't expecting. But I loved it completely. Like I don't think there's been a bad episode of Andor just yet.
Yeah, I don't know how I've been able to say at 9 episodes in that every single episode that comes out after it has been my favorite episode, but this one really took the cake for me. I instantly texted my friends in the morning like, guys, don't sleep on Andor, watch it today because it is that good.
Yeah.
And just to kind of touch base on what you were saying about Andy Serkis's character, Kino, he was definitely my favorite in this episode because I think I mentioned it in a previous episode how he kind of seemed like a bad guy.
Mm-hmm.
Like the way that he was keeping the prisoners in order, he didn't give off the perception that it was in a good way. It almost seemed like, hey, if you're not gonna hold down the position that you're assigned, I'm gonna get rid of you. That's how I interpret it.
Yes.
But then in this episode, the older gentleman that's on that team by the name of Olaf, he's old. I don't know if his heart's failing or what's going on. I don't remember. But he's like barely crawling to the finish line. And I think he has like 40 some days before he gets out. So the team's helping him. They're pulling for him. But then you see Kino step in, who you would think is not going to tolerate it. And he kind of reveals that he tells Olaf, you only have 41 days left or whatever it was.
Mm-hmm.
Let's get you there. And then to the point where Olaf has a stroke, I believe.
Yes.
And Andy Serkis's character is just like distraught over it. He's like, no, come on. Like, they call the doctor in. He tells the doctor, do whatever you got to do because he's about to get out.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of leads to the scene where the doctor tells him there's nothing I can do for him. Like, trust me, what I'm giving him, you guys would prefer than having to stay here. And that's when the doctor reveals that basically nobody is getting out of Narkina 5. That's where the big reveal, he says all the prisoners that were on level 2 were fried.
Something like that. Either 2 or 4, but one of them, yeah.
Yeah, 2 or 4. So let's say all the prisoners on level 2 were fried because apparently what happens is a prisoner that was done with their time in level 4 was moved to level 2 as soon as he was released. So as soon as level 2 found out, they started rioting and asking questions. So to take care of that, the Empire just offed every single one of them, which is insane.
Right. So it was pretty much revealed that this is not so much a prison as it is an enslavement camp, more than anything.
Correct. And Andy Serkis's character, who, by the way, the entire episode, Cassian is just on him like, hey, can you tell me how many guards are on each level? Because throughout this episode, Cassian's planning with other prisoners their escape. So he's asking him for information because he knows if anybody knows anything from the prisoners, it's Kino.
Mm-hmm.
And Kino's just like not having it because Kino just wants to have his head down, do his time, and get out of there. But as soon as the realization happens that nobody's leaving, Andy Serkis's character just like wakes up. And when I say wakes up, he just immediately realizes none of us are getting out of here. And he reveals to Cassian instantly. Cassian asks him one last time at the very end, how many guards are on each level? And Kino immediately tells him never more than 12. And that was the cliffhanger for the episode. Like, man, that line or that conversation alone, those 2 lines just really like did it for me, aside from everything else that we saw in the episode.
Right, because there was a scene earlier where Cassian is asking him, like, I guess they're across the hallway from each other, and he's basically asking him these exact same questions, like, do you ever wish to get out of here? Do you ever plan, to get out of here? And Kino was, of course, telling him, you better mind your business or else, you're not going to like the outcome of it. So he was real standoffish about it because he was still towing the line and just kind of like believing in the fact that, if I just do my time here and I work hard and I keep these guys in line, then I'll get out of here. But once, like you said, once that happened, there was a snap in him. There was a complete and total change in his demeanor where he realized, we're not getting out of here. So I think it's time I start working with this guy who obviously is formulating some sort of a plan.
Yeah, this whole sequence with Kino and Cassian was definitely my favorite things from the episode. I just want to quickly touch on Dedra and Cyril. Dedra's just gone full baddie, full blown villain. I know you guys, I admitted that I was rooting for her. Well, now I'm not. Can't stand the woman. The torture scene with Bix Colleen was just intense. We've never actually seen a torture on screen. The doors always close in the Star Wars universe before somebody's getting tortured, and you hear the screams. But in this one, they basically explain to you in detail how they torture them, and it's just like, whoa, that was brand new. And it kind of puts in perspective other torture scenes that we don't get to see in the Star Wars movies and such.
Right. I'm not gonna lie, I know I just saw this, so I'm asking you to think back a couple days, but I did not quite understand what the context of the torture was. They were talking about something about they recorded some audio that's been layered on top of each other that they play and it drives you mad or something like that, or
yeah, basically what happened was at some previous event where they had to basically off an entire civilization because they were trying to set up some Imperial facility there. They discovered these creatures that they disposed of released some type of scream specifically from the children that just like really did a number on your, on your brain. Mm-hmm. So somehow they were able to harness this to a torture device, and that's what they've been using on these people, to where it's just the screams are so intolerable that you have no option but to confess the truth, to give the Empire the information. So
gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, pretty scary stuff.
Yeah.
And then quickly want to touch on Cyril Karn, because he had easily one of the weirdest and creepiest scenes in Star Wars. He was stalking Dedra and just proceeds to confess that he's stalking her on a daily basis and being around her in a very similar line that Anakin uses with Padme in Attack of the Clones is intoxicating.
Yeah, so, that was a weird scene, man. But like, I'd be remiss if I didn't say she seems oddly into it.
Exactly. Yeah, I just have a feeling there's gonna be some forced like kiss at some point, just because they're so like deranged and so, gung-ho about being a part of the Empire.
Right.
It's like he's seeing it, she's not seeing it yet, but they're playing for the same side, so I won't be surprised.
Yeah.
But yeah, I look forward to this coming week's episode and the last arc, this last 3 episodes of this first season of Andor. I think it's going to be intense. I think it's going to leave me desperately wanting more when the season is over.
Yes. We also got another scene just on a personal level, like another scene with Cyril and his creepy mom. Once again, like this overbearing mother that we've been talking about, like she's whoever that lady is, whoever that actress is, she plays that role perfectly. So I got to give her props for that. She knew the assignment and she knocked it out of the park.
Absolutely.
Okay, so any last thoughts on this last episode of Andor?
No, I am ready to talk about Rebels because I'm excited about this episode.
Excellent. Then why don't you hit us with a synopsis?
So in this week's episode, while Ezra grapples with the news about his parents, the rebels make plans with Senator Bail Organa to secure 3 much-needed cruisers. Leading the mission is an agent handpicked by the senator himself, his daughter, Leia.
So, yep, Princess on Lothal is what it was called, and obviously there's only one main princess in our universe, and that is Miss Leia Organa. And this was a fun episode, I gotta say, from top to bottom. It was a very, very like one of those centralized one note plots, I guess. Yeah, but it was fun to watch. So the show, it begins with Hera on a transmission. She's talking to Kanan and Azadi about the news that Ezra received about his parents in the previous episode. And Hera says, how's he taking it? Kanan says, as good as you'd expect. We both knew Ezra might not get the news he hoped for about his parents. And Hera says, well, Governor Azadi, we're grateful you stood by them for so long. And Azadi says, not sure what good it did. Things don't seem any better here on Lothal. And Hera says, at the moment, maybe, but we hope to change that in the future. Speaking of which, Senator Organa heard about our losses on Gorel, and he's sending us reinforcements. His agent is coming to Lothal with 3 cruisers. And Kanan says, 3 cruisers? That's good news. Maybe a mission like this is just what Ezra needs. And Hera says, I hope you're right. We'll be there as soon as we can to help.
So after that discussion, we see the 3 cruisers arrive at Lothal, but they're immediately stopped by an Imperial cruiser, which of course there's a heavy Imperial presence now on Lothal. The Imperial officer informs the cruisers that Lothal is now a restricted system by order of the Emperor, and the cruisers inform that officer that they come bearing relief supplies for the citizens of Lothal, as per the decree by the Imperial Senate. I found it interesting in this part that they refer to it as the Imperial Senate. That's kind of something that I've been curious as we're watching Andor. It's like, do they know that they are still like senators of the Republic? I know what they're called, the Empire now, but do they, in the senator's mind, do they really know there's a difference? We know Mon Mothma knows there's a difference, obviously, but when they dropped the Imperial Senate line here, that's something that really got the cogs in my brain moving, and I'm gonna be like watching going forward to see if there's any more hints of that.
Well, it's kind of interesting that you mentioned that, because one thing I did notice was in the episode of Andor that we just talked about, there was a scene where Mon Mothma's in the Senate chambers or whatever.
Yes.
And on that little hovercraft or whatever that whoever's speaking is on, it had the Imperial logo on it, and I don't think I've ever noticed that in previous live action versions of it. I guess that would be literally the Imperial Senate, correct? Like where she
absolutely. Yeah, I noticed that detail too, and I was wondering if it was like they had to do some renovations or something after the battle between Yoda and Palpatine.
Right.
Or if it was just like, hey, you know what, we're the Empire now, let's
rebrand.
Let's rebrand. So anyways, getting back to the show, the officer informs them that he wasn't made aware of their visit, nor do they have a landing permit. So then we have some dialogue. The Imperials that are with this officer tell him, the permits are coming through now, sir. They're from Alderaan. And the officer says, another meddling delegation from Alderaan. I'll handle this personally. Attention, senatorial convoy. Your landing has been granted and fighters will escort you to Jaloth City Depot for processing. I'll see you there. And that's when we get the first scene with Princess Leia on screen. And she responds, this is Princess Leia Organa. I look forward to it, Lieutenant, and transmission. And then Leia tells her, pilots, well, there's no turning back now. And that's that's kind of the intro for the show. But what I really liked on this part was, and throughout the show, you're going to see a lot of fragments of original trilogy music, specifically Leia's theme. So when the Rebels title logo is displayed, you get a hint of Leia's theme, which I'll get into a little bit later.
Now, real quick, just before we go any further, this was the first glimpse we saw of Leia during this episode. How old would you say she is in this? I mean, how much longer does A New Hope happen after this, would you say?
So I believe Rebels season 2, it's either 4 or 3 BBY. I don't remember if season 1's 5 or 4, but let's just say 5, the exact same as Andor. Okay. Luke is supposed to be 19 years old in A New Hope. Okay. So if we do, she's got to be like 14 or 15 years old, if that's the case in this episode. Gotcha. So still very, very young. And at this point, she is a senator. So that's kind of crazy, right? Yeah. But based off of what we saw in the Kenobi series, not surprising at all.
No.
So Kanan and Ezra prepare to go into Jaloth City, disguise the stormtroopers to rendezvous with Leia and the rebels. Azadi lends them his bike, but tells Kanan he's not going to assist them further than that. Kanan's a bit disappointed, and Kanan tells Azadi he should get back into the fight after everything the Empire has done to him. And Azadi tells Kanan, please don't ask that of me. I do not want to go back to prison. So clearly his time in prison was not a pleasant one at all for him to not want to, join this uprising.
Right.
So Kanan and Ezra take his bike and they approach the cruisers, which have just landed there. And they proceed to see Leia walk off the ship and they kind of greet her. And Ezra says, hey, excuse me, miss, where's your commander? And Leia says, not much of a welcoming committee, trooper. And that scene was funny because it reminded me of when Luke opens the prison cell and finds Leia and she's like, aren't you a little short for a stormtrooper? So I think that scene was a little throwback to that. Worded differently, but it was in the same tone as A New Hope.
That's funny because what I got from that was Ezra once again putting his foot in his mouth. That's kind of like when you've seen it before where someone says, excuse me, nurse, because it's a woman, and it's like, I'm your doctor, that type of thing. Like,
yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Like real, just dismissive of him.
Yeah, Ezra definitely deserved it then. So after Leia says not much of a welcoming committee, Trooper Kanan says, I'm Kanan. This is Ezra. We're from Phoenix Squadron. And Leia says, I know who you are. And unless you want the deck officer to know too, I suggest you put your helmets back on and keep your mouth shut. Ezra says, excuse me? And Kanan says, you heard her, shut it. So Leia, who clearly has a plan already, she approaches the stormtroopers and informs them that she'd like to start her relief mission as soon as possible. The troopers tell her they are ordered to check her cruisers for contraband until the lieutenant arrives. So Kanan tells Leia, well, this plan's off to a good start. And Leia says, as a matter of fact, it's going perfectly. Where's the rest of your team? And Kanan says, they'll be here eventually. Leia responds, good. Then you can steal my ships. And both Kanan and Ezra surprisingly are like, what? Steal your ships? And Leia says, I'll explain later. First, I have to deal with the lieutenant. Follow my lead and try and keep up. So we see Leia approach the lieutenant who has just arrived on his shuttle. And she proceeds to explain to the lieutenant that she is ready to start her relief mission. The lieutenant, however, explains that since her ships have a strange habit of always ending up in the rebels' hands for some reason or another, he has brought in reinforcements which include gravity locks for Leia's cruisers and AT-ATs to defend against rebels. Since her ships are detained, Leia convinces the officer to give her his shuttle so that she can continue her mission. Leia, Kanan, and Ezra all proceed to board the ship and take off. So in that scene, she's already playing, the officer. Leia is very good with her words, which we've seen in the movies and Child Leia and Obi-Wan. Mm-hmm. And she's just walking all over this Imperial lieutenant.
Right.
So they get on the shuttle and take off, and Kanan proceeds to talk to Leia. And Kanan says, I hate to say it, but whoever came up with this plan severely underestimated the Empire's security. And Leia goes, I'm sorry. Kanan says, don't be. It's not your fault. And Leia responds, yes, it is actually. This was my plan. And Ezra says, we need those ships. Why didn't you just hand them off to us in deep space? Leia tells Ezra, you don't understand. It's not that simple. If the Empire could prove Alderaan provided ships to the rebels, we'd lose our seat in the Senate and be charged with treason. But if they're stolen on a planet controlled by the Empire, Kanan interrupts, Alderaan would be blameless. Have to admit, that was a good plan. And Leia says, well, now we need a new one. And then Chopper hits the comms and you just hear him grunting. Mm-hmm. And Ezra goes, yeah, what is it, Chopper? Stormtroopers? So the ship, the Imperial shuttle that they've taken, they approach Azadi's camp. And apparently he is now being held captive by stormtroopers. So the rebels and Leia, they get off the shuttle and they begin to talk to the stormtroopers. And the trooper stops them and says, this is a secure site. State your business. Kanan, who's still disguised as a stormtrooper, says, I'm taking the Princess Ambassador here on a scouting mission for possible refugee relocation. The trooper tells him, this is not a safe area for you. There's a high level of rebel activity happening at the moment. And Kanan says, well, we're finishing our survey. We could take these prisoners back to Jaloth for you. The trooper tells him, that won't be necessary. We have orders to terminate one of them immediately. And Leia chimes in and says, hold on, trooper. As a representative of the Senate, I demand to know what this man has done. And the trooper tells her, he's a fugitive from an Imperial prison. Now depart immediately for your own safety. Where you find one rebel, there are usually more. So after this happens, you see Chopper just start losing it. He's going into spin mode. Yeah. And he's saying something. Kanan knows what he's saying and says, Chopper's receiving a signal. And Ezra says, you know what that means? Hera's here. So at that moment, Hera swoops in and begins firing on the troopers, which while Kanan, Ezra, Azadi, and Leia take cover. Azadi tells Kanan, your friends might shoot you in that armor. And Kanan says, hey, you know what? That's not a bad idea, Governor. Take the princess hostage? And Azadi's like, what? And Leia says, if I'm seen escaping with you, I'll be labeled as a traitor. You have to take me prisoner. So they're kind of making up a plan on the fly. This is basically what's going to happen throughout the entire episode. Leia is not known as a rebel sympathizer. She's a senator, so she can't break her cover again. Right. With a reference to Andor. That's what we see with Mon Mothma, what's going on in season 1 of that show. So Azadi makes a break for it with Leia, giving the appearance that he's taking her hostage. And Kanan jumps in front of the troopers to distract them and basically tell them, hold on, I'll get Leia's my responsibility. So he chases them on board the Ghost, only to be stopped by Zeb, who at that point was already told by the other rebels, hey, when Kanan and Ezra show up, knock them out. you have our permission because we have to make it seem like all this was not intentional. Like the princess is not part of our little rebel cell. So of course, Zeb grins, takes absolutely all the pride in being able to knock out Kanan and Ezra as hard as he can to make it seem like they are being taken prisoners themselves. Right. So it's funny because Zeb proceeds to drag them onto the Ghost, and they show the troopers that are shooting at the Ghost, and they're like, they're taking prisoners? They do that now?
And that reminded me of one of the sequel lines where I forgot who it was. I think Finn turns to Poe or vice versa, and it's like, they fly now? And then he was like, they fly now.
Yeah.
And I know that came after this, so I'm wondering if that was just kind of like I don't know. I don't know if maybe that's a stretch or not, but
nah, you never know, right? Yeah. There's so much symmetry and rhyme in Star Wars.
Right.
It would not surprise me at all. But that's a good call. Shout out to Rise of Skywalker. So back at the cruisers, the stormtroopers have completed their scan of Leia's ships but have found no contraband. After they inform the lieutenant about that, he receives a call on comms warning him that they found Azadi, but that he was intercepted by rebels along with a cadet and some princess ambassador. The lieutenant proceeds to shout out, "She's under our protection. Deploy search patrols now." So back on board the Ghost, the team finally gets to meet with Ezra after the events of the previous episode when he found out what he found out about his parents. Mm-hmm. And they offer their condolences to Ezra. And Ezra, he's feeling bummed out at that moment, but he basically tells them, "I'm going to be all right. I just need some time." So you see Ezra walk to the cockpit of the Ghost to get some alone time and revisit that picture of his parents and him that Sabine recovered for him in a previous episode. And as he's walking by, Leia just notices that he's feeling down. She doesn't know all the details of what Ezra's been through. So she looks at Kanan and she says, "Is he all right?" And Kanan says, "He's okay. He just lost some people close to him. It's a challenge being his age with so much responsibility." And I love that line because he's talking to Leia. So Leia knows, somehow, this person, Kanan, is speaking to me. He's not necessarily just talking about Ezra. He's speaking to me.
Right.
So Leia, of course, responds with, "I know that feeling." And Kanan says, "Maybe he could use a friend." So we see Leia walk to the cockpit to offer some words to Ezra. And I love this scene specifically because this is where they really use Leia's theme from the original trilogy, which, by the way, easily one of my favorite Star Wars pieces. And they use that to set the tone for the conversation that she's going to have with Ezra. So Leia tells Ezra, "I know who you are. You're Ezra Bridger. I heard your transmission." And Ezra goes, "Yeah, my parents heard it too, but they're gone now, unfortunately." And Leia says, "I'm sorry." Ezra says, "It's just there's so much against us. Do you ever wonder?" And Leia immediately cuts him off and says, "If this fight is even worth it? Every day, but I'm still here." And Ezra says, "But you're a princess. You don't have to risk your life doing this." And Leia says, "I feel like because I can fight, I have to for those who cannot. And I think you might be the same way." Ezra immediately, he comes back to life, to reality, listening to Leia's words. And Ezra says, "You know what? Let's figure out a way to get your ships." So the other reason I love this scene is because Leia, at this point in time, she's not a rebel leader. She's an Imperial senator that's trying to help a rebel cause. And the dialogue she has with Kanan I just mentioned, and this dialogue she's having with Ezra, you see her giving like words of advice like a leader would. Mm-hmm. So we really get a glimpse of Leia growing into a rebel leader in this episode. I love this episode more than I remembered the previous viewings. And like I told you before, Pete, when I saw Obi-Wan Kenobi, I just gained a whole new like love and perspective for Leia because of young Leia. So when I watched this episode, it was like I was watching it from the perspective of young Leia, not the original trilogy Leia that, don't get me wrong, she's a rebel leader and all that. But this Leia that we see here and the young Leia that we see in Obi-Wan Kenobi, I feel we see more Padme in these versions of Leia than we see Padme in the original trilogy version. And to be fair, Padme didn't exist right when those movies came out, but I just love the character so much in Obi-Wan Kenobi for giving Leia so much more depth. And I've watched this entire episode from that perspective, and it really like changed the narrative for me even more on Leia.
That's a great observation.
Yeah, thank you. So now I'm gonna proceed to buy Leia Black series and everything Leia, because she's a rebel leader. She's a rebel with a cause.
Right, exactly.
So after that conversation Ezra has with Leia, they go meet up with the Ghost crew, who are already formulating a plan to get those cruisers back. So them, along with Leia, create a plan to get Leia's cruisers out of the hands of the Empire. And it was a cool scene. I didn't write the dialogue on this one. I wish I did, because now going back on it, speaking of leadership, Leia shows it here too. The crew is basically convinced that they can't do it. And this is kind of the first time we've ever heard them say something like that.
Yeah.
And Leia immediately steps in and tells them basically something to the extent of, don't tell me you can't do it. Tell me what we need to get it done, and let's get this done.
Right.
So as soon as she says that, they start thinking of ideas. And one of the ideas is, well, obviously the gravity locks are an issue. So Sabine, who loves her explosives, she chimes in and basically says, I can use the explosives to blast off the gravity locks. However, Azadi chimes in, and he proceeds to tell the team that they can't simply just blast the locks off. And he knows this specifically because he assembled them while he was in prison. So as much as he doesn't want to help the rebels because he doesn't want to get captured again, he tells them that he knows how to take them off, and he agrees to help. But if they can help him get off of Lothal, since he's no longer safe there.
Right.
So after they formulate this plan, they each respectively, take their ship as to how they're going to execute it. So we see the Phantom approach the Imperial base where Leia's cruisers are being held, and the Imperial officers immediately recognize it as the stolen rebel ship from Azadi's camp. Leia, along with Kanan and Ezra in disguise again as stormtroopers, approach the officers and distract them, while Azadi, Chopper, and Sabine proceed to disengage the gravity locks. They manage to disable the first one, and Sabine steals the ship while Azadi moves on to the next. The stormtroopers, however, discover what is happening and begin engaging against Azadi and Chopper. And Sabine proceeds to provide air support from her stolen cruiser, but she's unfortunately immediately engaged by an AT-AT. Remember, the Empire deployed 2 AT-AT specifically to help against rebel uprisings. So after that happens, Hera swoops in to engage the AT-AT so that Sabine can escape, but it's only temporary as the walker recovers and is ready to engage the rebels who are still grounded. So as that first AT-AT that Hera almost took out starts recovering, the second one begins firing at Hera, and it chases her away as the recovering AT-AT prepares to fire on the grounded rebels. So Kanan chimes in and says, secure the third ship, I'll handle the walker. Leia says, handle the walker? How? And Ezra says, just trust us, go. So at that moment, we get a really cool scene where Kanan, basically storms the first AT-AT with his lightsaber in hand and proceeds to chop 2 of the legs out, causing the AT-AT to fall to the ground. And Leia's astonished, because I don't think she's, well, I can't say that anymore after Obi-Wan Kenobi.
I knew what you were going to say, but yeah, no.
Yeah, so maybe a little bit of retcon here. Leia says, did you see that? And Ezra says, if you like that, watch this. So let's assume that Obi-Wan Kenobi has not come out. This is the first time that Leia is seeing a Jedi. Mm-hmm. And let's just go from there. So after Ezra tells her that, Ezra proceeds to force pull the blasters out of the troopers' hands who are engaging Azadi and Chopper. Leia picks up a blaster and begins firing on the troopers, revealing herself, just as Kanan and Ezra just did, that she is more than just a simple senator. Mm-hmm. So Azadi is fortunately able to remove the gravity lock off the second cruiser and hands the ship over to Kanan. So after that, Azadi is then able to successfully remove the gravity lock from the third cruiser and steal it just in time to step in and save the rebels from the last AT-AT. Having secured all 3 cruisers, the rebels can now board it and leave. So after they successfully get the cruisers, we see Ezra boarding that third one so that he can escape with the rest of the team. And Leia is with him. And he tells Leia, time for me to go. And Leia proceeds to grab Ezra. And Ezra's like, wait, what are you doing? And Leia says, stop that rebel. He's stealing my transport. And then she whispers to Ezra, make it look good. And Ezra says, oh, we got to make this look good. And Leia says, you have my permission. And Ezra says, see you later, princess. And proceeds to blast stun her, knocking her out temporarily.
Right.
So both the third cruiser and the Phantom take off together. And the lieutenant proceeds to approach Leia and help her up. And Leia looks at him and says, my ships, you lost my ships. And the lieutenant says, I'm afraid so. And Leia says, you should be afraid. Just wait until I tell the Senate that the Imperial presence on Lothal is helpless against the rebels. And the lieutenant says, no, that will not be necessary. I assure you, Alderaan will be fully compensated for your lost ships. So, not only did they steal, or not steal, but they stole from the Empire. Right. They're getting these supplies to Lothal. Now they're going to get compensation for all the trouble. So, pretty awesome. Leia says, fine. Oh, and I'll need your shuttle so I can return home. The lieutenant says, my shuttle, right. Where is it? And Leia says, Lieutenant, did you lose your ship too? And the lieutenant says, I'll summon you another one right away. So she's just walking all over these Imperials.
Just clowning them left and right.
Yes, mind you, like we said, she's a 14 or 15-year-old girl just doing the Empire dirty. So after that, the rebels regroup with the Phoenix Squadron along with Governor Azadi. And Hera says, so Governor, we need to find a safe place for you. And Azadi says, I already know where I'm going, back home. Kanan says, I knew you'd come around. And Azadi says, I couldn't see it before, but going to prison with the Bridgers started something. That something has grown bigger than I ever imagined. I owe it to them, and I owe it to you to see it through to the end. And Ezra looks at Azadi and says, welcome back to the fight, Governor.
Okay, well, yeah, man, that was a really fun episode. I really dug that one. That one, it kind of reminded me of the kind of fun, and I know it's all nostalgia based, of that episode with Lando, that first time he came back.
Yeah.
It was just kind of like so chock full of nostalgia that there's characters in there that I already emotionally invested in. So I was in it from the minute it started. So I really enjoyed it. And I was also really glad to see Azadi back. And I don't know if he comes back again later, but I can't recall right now. Of course, Mr. Clancy Brown, we've already praised him the last 2 episodes. So it was good to see him back too.
Yeah, and just to give you guys a bit more information in case you're wanting to know more about that character, his time as governor is visited in the first Thrawn book. Okay. So definitely something, if you guys want to know more about Rebels, start that series up because it is a good one.
Excellent. Well, that brings us to the end of our recap of this episode of Rebels. Next week's episode will be Season 2, Episode 13. It's called The Protector of Concord Dawn, which I think we all know where that's leading, and I'm very excited the potential of that.
Absolutely.
So before we let you guys go, I want to remind everyone to please like, share, subscribe, and rate. We really appreciate it if you've done it already. Share it with a friend. Share it with somebody that you know is a Star Wars fan. I want to also invite everyone to jump in the discussion. Send us any comments, questions, concerns, anything that you think that we need to hear about the show. We're open to hear it. Any closing comments, Rolly?
Just want to wish all my, all the listeners and viewers out there, hope you guys have a happy weekend, and look forward to talking about the next episode with you guys next week.
Absolutely. So if nothing else, then we'll see you next week. And this has been Pete Salas along with
Rolando Zamora
saying, may the force be with you always. Goodbye from Lothal.